Weird shit is happening out there. You should go check it out.
The cooperative gameplay stylings of the Borderlands series with cults, military factions, and vampires. Lots and lots of vampires. Redfall has just released, and if you've gotten tired from facing off against waves and waves of zombies, then Redfall may be for you. But while the concept of a vampire game works great on paper, how is the execution?
And how would you like me to answer that, Philip?
Developed by Arcane Studios, the team behind Deathloop, Prey, and the Dishonored series, Redfall is an open-world first-person shooter based in the fictional location of Redfall. Similar to Borderlands, Redfall starts off with you selecting one of 4 specialist survivors to retake the isle or the area of Redfall from vampires. Now, Redfall is a pretty standard open-world first-person shooter with some light RPG mechanics when it comes to weapon levels and upgrading your character's abilities.
Pretty standard, really.
Like, say, the Far Cry series before it, or, well, really, any open-world game, there will be side missions to do, safe houses to unlock, weapons to loot, and, well, vampires to slay. Now, the story kicks off with the island or the area slowly being taken over by vampires, and by the time the population catches on, it's too late.
The previous owner, he mysteriously disappeared because I killed him.
The vampires have pushed the water out of the fishing town and blocked out the sun.
Have you ever seen the sun set at 3 p.m.?
Aye, once, when I was sailing round the Arctic.
Shut up, you!
And with that, the vampires are now in control of the town, which is where the game actually first kicks off. As the survivors are trying to escape via ferries and boats, and vampires use magic to push back and solidify the water surrounding Redfall, a ferry carrying some survivors and our characters is caught in this attack, and the only survivors are us, the player. From here, we're introduced to other threats outside of vampires with cult military factions who worship the vampires like gods, a little similar to how Dracula has a hold over Renfield.
Your eyelids are getting heavy. You feel that... Renfield, you fell asleep too soon.
The military cult faction act as sort of standard enemy threats which can be taken down with generic small arm fire, a little bit sort of like the NPCs from Predator Hunting Grounds. Vampires, on the other hand, are completely different. Standard weapons will hurt and stun them, yes, but it won't put them down permanently. And to do so, you'll need to use specialist weapons or a traditional stake through the heart.
Is there no other way?
One other. We could cut off her head, stuff her mouth with garlic, and tear off her ears.
Give me the stake.
Now, each vampire too is stronger and faster than the standard military faction or the cult enemies that you'll go up against, some of which have special abilities like draining your blood and your health to replenish their own health, or placing magical shields around themselves and others. Like you'd expect, your characters do have access to special weapons like the UV beam weapons, which turns vampires into ash statues, which I'll come back to in a moment. You'll also have access to a stake launcher, which fires wooden stakes, instantly taking down vampires, and acts a bit like a power weapon in that it will deal a load of damage or instantly take out vampires, but only has 3 rounds to a magazine, and it takes ages to reload. There is also the weapon of the flare gun, but to be honest, I never really used it. Now, each survivor in Redfall has unique abilities and gadgets, which makes Redfall a unique experience when it comes to cooperative play. There's Jacob, the ex-military sniper, there's Remy, a telepath, Devinda, a cryptozoologist with gadgets, and Remy, the combat engineer. Now, just like in Borderlands, each character does have access to special abilities and an ultimate ability. For example, Jacob has a mystical raven which can be used to scout out areas ahead and ping targets. Devinda has a teleportation device which can be used by both Devinda and the team to short-range teleport around the world, while Remy's ultimate ability is summoning her vampire ex-boyfriend into combat to assist. The combat feels like it's been pulled straight out of the Borderlands series rather than Deathloop or Dishonored, but Redfall is an open-world game that is also not too daunting. Rather than having a traditional open world with multiple levels of different vampires so the player is only in their relevant zones or areas, say similar to World of Warcraft, Redfall is set into different districts where once the player defeats that zone's main boss, they'll move into the next area. And as you'd expect too, there's a leveling system for both weapons and for survivors. Each survivor can upgrade themselves and their special abilities, as well as smaller things like how much ammo they can carry or how many special items they can carry, like lockpicks for example. And you'll find new and special weapons just out in the world by doing main missions, side missions, or simply just exploring. As you further progress in the game, you'll come up against special vampires like the Rook, which is basically the tank in Left 4 Dead that will absorb a large amount of damage. There's also Siphons, which when they've taken damage, they'll drain your health to replenish their own, which, yeah, gets annoying if you get distracted in combat. But there's also large bosses for areas or zones, which, as you'd expect as you progress into new areas, they get tougher and stronger. While Redfall is refreshing compared to other repetitive zombie shooters that we've had over the years, there are some shortfallings. Obviously, it feels like a game that was released a bit too early. There's obviously some graphical issues for starters. Normally, I don't mind these as long as it populates within a second or two, like hey, the original Gears of War had this issue when it originally released, but I would go into the world and it wouldn't load the graphics. I'd go into the menu, I'd back out, and then it would load for some reason. Or in one instance, the item or the graphics or the decal of the world loaded, I looked at it, and then it immediately downgraded while I was looking at it. There's also a bit of T-posing going on, clipping through walls. It's not polished, let's just say that. Interesting too, the game isn't overly difficult. The hard difficulty can easily be played with friends, which is the best way to experience Redfall. But a problem with the game being too easy is you won't bother upgrading your character's abilities or looking at the skill trees or any of that really. Sure, you constantly change your weapons every time you pick up a new weapon, you just want to compare how much damage it does, but there are multiple points where I looked at my skill tree and noticed I had a fistful of points that I hadn't used. It feels like this game's difficulty needs to be buffed a bit to where you need to think about what abilities you have and what abilities your team needs you to use. And the vampire weapons in this game too are super overpowered, even playing on hard mode. The UV beam can be used to nearly instantly turn vampires into ash, unless it is the special tank-like Rook enemy. Most vampires turn into ash straight away. And yeah, I can see the argument of, well, it's UV light. UV light's going to affect vampires either way. And sure, that's not a bad argument, but then why do UV weapons have a weapon rating and a damage output? It's a shame too, because as you play Redfall, hearing vampires teleport and roam around the world can be a bit frightening. And sadly, any continuation of that fear is gone when you get into combat and they're dead pretty quick. There was also a cool idea with the vampire gods in this game. As you progress in the main story, you'll begin to anger the vampire gods, and as you slaughter vampires, do missions, a meter will slowly start to fill. And once this is full, the gods will send down the Rook enemy variant, the tanky small enemy boss, and depending on where you are or what you're doing, it can be difficult and a bit of a juggling act to face off against a few special different vampire enemies at once. The cutscenes for Redfall are a bit hit and miss. When you move from mission to mission, it's in this freeze frame art style for the cutscenes and it's pretty lame. But the intro cutscene with the motion art style. Now sure, it's the same thing, it's sort of like a freeze frame, but it's moving art rather than stills of gameplay, and it looks rad and it pulled my interest into the world of Redfall. However, the atmosphere and a bit of the world that Arkane have created in Redfall is interesting, at least in my opinion. Redfall has a day-night cycle, and as the sun is blocked by magics, vampires still roam around the streets, and the world feels just, I don't know, a bit safer during the day. At nighttime though, the atmosphere changes into a bit of a horror styling, and it's nothing like Dead Space or Resident Evil, but there's noises in bushes, there's vampires playing with their food, and random cries for help, and it's a pretty cool vibe. The lore or story of the vampires isolating Redfall is also very interesting. The idea of them blocking out the sun so they just can't be turned to ash, and pushing away and solidifying the water to not only stop people from escaping, but also entering to help. And yeah, while some of the game looks pretty copy, paste and bland, there are some areas of the game that looks pretty damn good and the atmosphere works really well with it. Like, look at this and tell me it actually doesn't look alright. Now, I've seen a few reviews go up and some of my friends that I played with didn't overly enjoy Redfall.
I cannot even speak the name of the vampire that organized that monstrosity.
I don't give a fuck. His name was Mike.
Fucking Mike.
But I enjoyed the experience of playing a cooperative shooter with friends, having a laugh, and I don't know, I think I kinda liked Redfall on some areas. Yeah, Redfall isn't polished, but yeah, it's a bit of fun. I like the world, I like the visual setting of Redfall. I like the idea of doing another looter shooter, but instead of zombies, we got vampires. I kinda wish we could make our own character rather than playing as a pre-made one, but each character here does have some pretty damn cool abilities. Maybe it's because as a kid or a young teenager I owned nearly every movie tie-in game, especially those MCU games which were very, very bad, but Redfall, it's not that bad. Is it the worst game to release this year? No, but it is hard when we've had some stellar titles like Jedi Survivor, Dead Space and Resident Evil 4. But is there fun to be had? Yeah, sure. Especially if you're playing with friends and you sort of roleplay to further immerse yourself in the game. But also, yeah, Redfall does have its fair share of bugs. So was it the worst game? No. Should it have released like this? Probably not, but it doesn't mean you can't have fun with it. Honestly, Redfall is one of the best examples of a Game Pass game. So if you're tired of zombies, or the ridden, or the infected, or those blessed by Papa Nurgle, then Redfall might quench your thirst. So if you enjoyed 30 Days of Night, or you're a fan of What We Do in the Shadows, or Dracula, or any vampire movie, except Twilight because they don't count, then I'd say at least take a look at Redfall. If not now, then in a few months' time to see how it compares. But whether this is your first time with a vampire game, or you've been slaying them since the Soul Reaver days back on PlayStation 1, always remember to play with each other and play with yourself.